You do not go to Tokyo because you are adventurous. You go because your grades are bad and your academic advisor has stopped trying to look hopeful. You failed statistics once, then again in a way that felt personal, and now the university is presenting a semester abroad as a growth opportunity, which is university language for maybe another country can make something out of you. The program has 4 choices: Sydney, which is full, Amsterdam, which is full, Seoul, which is full, and Tokyo, which still has openings because everyone else in your department looked at the language requirement and decided they preferred their confusion in English. You choose Tokyo, not because you are brave, but because you are out of alternatives. This has been the central strategy of your early 20s so far. You are 21 years old and building your identity almost entirely out of consequences. Your Japanese is at the level your professor describes as promising, which turns out to be academic language for technically alive, but not fit for traffic. You know enough to introduce yourself, order food, apologize for things, and accidentally say sentences that make native speakers blink twice before deciding whether correcting you is worth the energy. You have packed for the wrong season because you saw a video of cherry blossoms and assumed Tokyo meant soft sunshine and poetic melancholy. It does not. It means wind. It means train platforms that turn your fingers into theoretical objects. It means a cold that is not dramatic enough to earn sympathy and not mild enough to ignore. Your mother cries at the airport in a way that suggests she thinks she is sending you into an active war zone. She has Googled earthquakes, rail safety, typhoons, food poisoning, apartment scams, and whether foreign students are allowed to die of loneliness in Japan, or if that is somehow regulated. She texts you 11 times before your plane lands. 4 messages are about hydration. 3 are about tectonic activity. 1 is a screenshot of a phrasebook page in case you need to tell a stranger you are allergic to shellfish, which you are not. The rest are questions about whether your apartment has a deadbolt. The apartment is in Itabashi, in North Tokyo, in a neighborhood nobody writes essays about because essays are usually written about neighborhoods where people go on purpose. Itabashi is where people live. Really live. The streets are narrow. The buildings are practical. There is a dentist with a faded blue sign, a bicycle repair shop with tires hanging outside, a family mart on the corner, a laundromat with 6 machines and no music, and a tiny teishoku place by the station that you do not notice on the first day because jet lag has reduced your personality to luggage management. Your building is 5 stories high and the hallway smells faintly like detergent and wet umbrellas. Your apartment is on the 4th floor. It is 18 square meters, which sounds fine until you enter it and realize square meters can be arranged maliciously. There is a kitchenette the width of a confident shrug. There is a 1-burner stove, a sink that seems emotionally opposed to large dishes, a mini fridge that could maybe hold 3 days of groceries if your groceries had low self-esteem, and a bathroom unit so compact the toilet, sink, and shower appear to have signed a coexistence agreement. You put your suitcase down. You sit in the desk chair because there is nowhere else that qualifies as seating. You look around. You are in Tokyo. You are alone. Outside your window are 8 million private routines happening at once, and you belong to none of them. Your mother sends earthquake link number 12. The radiator hums with the optimism of something that has never met a draft. That night, you eat convenience store egg sandwiches on your bed ladder because you have no table and because standing in your own apartment somehow feels too honest. Orientation begins the next morning in a university building in Shinjuku that looks like it was designed by someone who respects glass more than people. You learn where the student office is, how to separate trash into categories that feel theological, and that your commute will involve 2 train lines, 1 transfer, and the daily emotional experience of being folded into public transportation by a city that has perfected the geometry of human compression. Everyone at orientation is excited in the performative way young people are when they are afraid. You pretend to be one of them. You nod when people talk about exploring. You say things like, I really want to improve my Japanese and immerse myself in the culture. What you actually want is for someone to tell you which supermarket is cheapest, and whether crying in a Don Quixote counts as a local experience. By the third day, you have developed a routine of going to class, getting lost in a station the size of a philosophy problem, returning to your apartment, and eating something from a convenience store under fluorescent light while your phone insists this is the best time to call home. On day 5, it rains sideways. You miss your stop because all station names still sound like multiple choice answers. You walk back 20 minutes in wet sneakers and discover the tiny Teishoku place by the station because its Norin is moving in the wind, and because hunger lowers your standards but heightens your instincts. The place has 8 counter seats, 3 small tables, handwritten menu cards, a television in the corner showing baseball, and the specific warmth of a room that has been earning trust longer than you have been alive. Behind the counter is a woman in her late 60s wearing an apron with tiny white flowers on it. Her hair is tied back, her hands move fast. She glances at you once and in that single glance understands everything essential. Foreigner, student, wet, hungry, underfed in a way that suggests poor planning rather than ideology. Her husband is at the register reading glasses low on his nose, pretending not to watch you struggle with the menu. You order the first set you can pronounce without injuring the language. It arrives in 7 minutes. Rice, miso soup, grilled salmon, pickles, a potato salad that tastes like someone's mother decided mayonnaise could be an emotion. You eat with the concentration of a man taking a final exam in gratitude. Halfway through, the woman places an extra croquette on your tray without comment. You look up, confused. She says, "You are too thin." Her English is limited. Her diagnosis is flawless. You try to protest because you have already paid, and because politeness is all you have left when competence fails. She waves one hand as if your objections are made of smoke. You eat the croquette. It is hot enough to reset your relationship with being alive. When you leave, she says, "Come again," in the tone of someone who is not extending an invitation, but issuing instructions. The next night, you come again, because the apartment is cold and silent, and the food tasted like being briefly forgiven. The second time she remembers your order. The third time she remembers you are a student. The fourth time she asks, in a mix of Japanese and improvised English, whether you eat breakfast. You lie and say yes. She looks at you in the same way customs officers look at luggage that claims not to contain fruit. The next morning, when you stop in before class to buy tea from the vending machine outside, she steps out from the shop and puts a wrapped onigiri into your hand. "Breakfast," she says. No argument. This becomes a thing. Not every day. Just often enough that it starts to feel like weather. Some mornings she is sweeping outside and hands you a rice ball. Some evenings, she slides an extra dish onto your tray and acts as though gravity did it. If you arrive late after the dinner rush, she tells you to sit and brings tea without asking. You learn her name is Fumiko. Her husband is Masao. The shop is called Sakura Teishoku, though everyone in the neighborhood just calls it Sakura. Your classmates discover chain restaurants and viral cafes and reservation-only places in neighborhoods where all menus are printed on concrete. You discover that the most beautiful sentence in any language may be "Sit down, I saved you some rice." During midterms, you start studying at the last corner seat because the apartment has become unbearable in the specific way tiny spaces become unbearable when your thoughts learn the floor plan. Fumiko never tells you to leave. At 8 o'clock, she lowers the volume on the television. At 8:30, she refills your tea. At 9 o'clock, she places sliced oranges beside your notebook. As if vitamin deficiency is a moral failing she personally refuses to permit. One night you mention, casually, that you have an exam the next morning and probably will not have time to stop by for dinner. The next day at 11:41, of the girls from your exchange class points at the cloth-wrapped box on your desk and asks where you bought it. You say, "I didn't. The lady from my diner made it." She laughs because that sentence sounds invented. Then you unwrap it. Rice packed tight. Tamagoyaki. Chicken with ginger. Pickled vegetables. Apple slices salted so they do not brown. It is not a lunch. It is a position statement. Your classmates stare at it with the respectful envy usually reserved for trust funds and clear skin. One guy asks if she adopts international students as a hobby. You laugh, but quietly, because some jokes land too close to a need. There is a note inside written in careful English on the back of a receipt. Eat before test. Brain also needs rice. You read it twice. You are 21 years old sitting in a Tokyo classroom with a lunch packed by a woman you have known for 3 weeks, and for a moment the day becomes more manageable than it deserves to be. After that, you stop pretending Sakura is just somewhere you eat. It becomes the place in the city where your shoulders lower half an inch the second you walk in. Masao begins grunting hello in a way that eventually reveals itself to be friendliness. Fumiko starts asking about your classes, and when your answer gets too abstract, she narrows it down to the only question she respects. Did you eat? Did you sleep? Did you wear enough layers? She has no interest in your long-term goals. She is focused on operational survival. In November, the cold gets sharper. Tokyo in late autumn is rude in a restrained way. One evening, you come in without gloves, cheeks red from the wind, and Fumiko clicks her tongue so hard it could qualify as punctuation. The next day, a scarf appears folded beside your tray. Cream-colored, hand-knitted, slightly uneven in places. She says only take it. You start to say you can't. She looks at you until the sentence dies. Then she comes around the counter, wraps it around your neck herself, tugs the ends even, steps back, and mutters that students are useless at winter. Her fingers brush your jaw when she adjusts it. The touch is brief, practical, almost absent-minded, but it leaves behind the sort of warmth that does not come from wool. You wear the scarf every day after that, not because it is especially fashionable. It is not. It has the shape of something made for use, not admiration, but because every morning on the platform when the train doors open and the cold moves in, it feels like someone expected the weather and prepared for you anyway. Fumiko teaches you to cook by ambush, not in a formal way. She never invites you over or announces a lesson. She simply catches you watching too closely while she makes miso soup and decides this is now your education. She hands you a knife and points at daikon. Your cuts are wrong. She corrects them without ceremony. She shows you how to rinse rice properly, how to judge oil temperature by sound, how to make tamagoyaki without turning it into philosophical rubble. She believes packet dashi is acceptable only in emergencies, and student life, in her opinion, contains too many self-declared emergencies. Once, when she catches a cup noodle container in your backpack, she holds it up between two fingers the way a biologist might display a concerning insect. You try to explain that you were busy. She says, busy is not a food group. Then, she gives you a container of stew to take home. You stop buying cup noodles after that, not because you no longer want them, but because disappointing Fumiko has become emotionally expensive. She hums while she cooks. Not a song you know, not anything from the radio. Just a small looping melody that seems older than performance. When she hums, Masao gets quieter. Regulars lower their voices without discussing it. The sound moves through the shop like steam. You notice the change, but read it as respect. The old cook has earned the room. That is the explanation you give yourself. It is not the full explanation, but it is close enough to live inside for a while. Evenings settle into a rhythm. You arrive after class. You sit at the counter. Baseball game is on, or a detective drama, or a variety show where everyone laughs too loudly at food. You eat. You study. Fumiko complains that your handwriting looks tired. Masao pretends he does not understand your Japanese and then reveals, without warning, that he has understood all of it for months. Sometimes neighborhood regulars talk to you. A taxi driver, a retired teacher, a woman who runs the flower shop. They all ask the same basic questions. Where are you from? How long are you here? Do you miss home? Only the last one ever matters. One night during finals, you fall asleep over your notes. Not dramatically, you just blink too slowly, and the next thing you know, Your cheek is pressed against the table of derivatives and regret. When you wake, the shop is closed, chairs are up, the lights are lower. Your notebook has been moved away from the soy sauce. A folded towel is under your head. Your backpack is beside you. The scarf is draped over your shoulders again because at some point you had taken it off. Fumiko is wiping the counter. She says, without looking at you, if you are going to collapse, at least do it after eating. On Saturdays, you do laundry at the coin laundromat across from Sakura because your balcony machine has the spin strength of a disappointed parent. While your clothes rotate through soapy exile, you eat breakfast at the shop, rice porridge in winter, grilled salmon, pickles, tea hot enough to redeem the week. Fumiko always places your tray down first before anyone else's, even if you arrived later. You assume it is because you are the student, and students exist in a category somewhere between guest and municipal concern. You do not realize yet that some routines are older than the people living inside them. She begins setting aside things for you before you ask. An umbrella on rainy days. A thermos of tea when she hears there is a cold going around campus. A packet of vitamin gummies she bought because the television said students do. Not see enough sunlight. Once she sends you home with Mikan and instructs you to eat 2 immediately and 1 later. You do it because the alternative would feel like violating a minor but sacred law. Your apartment slowly fills with evidence that somebody in Tokyo has opinions about your continued functioning. Fumiko's daughter appears on weekends. Her name is Yui. She is in her 40s, efficient, kind, and built out of the same calm energy, but with less time for theatrical disapproval. She helps with prep, talks to suppliers, and occasionally laughs at the way her mother watches you finish vegetables, like it is a horse race she has bet on emotionally. Once Yui sees Fumiko wrapping leftovers for you, and her face does something strange. Not sad exactly, not surprised, more like someone watching an old room in a house light up after years of darkness. December arrives. The city turns crisp and bright in that clean winter way Tokyo does, where the sky looks almost fabricated. One evening, after a long silence broken only by the knife on the cutting board and the news murmuring from the television, Fumiko tells you to come around the counter. She adjusts the scarf again, though it does not need adjusting. Then she puts her hand briefly against your cheek and studies your face with an expression you cannot read, not because it is mysterious, because it contains too many things at once to sort in real time: pride, sadness, relief, something else under all 3. You start waking up early on Saturdays, not because you enjoy mornings, you do not, but because there is something stabilizing about the first hour in Sakura. The metal shutters going up, the rice cooker starting its private weather system, Fumiko lining up bowls, Masao turning the sign. You sit at the counter half awake while she makes okayu and miso soup and slices scallions with the confidence of someone whose hands reached competence decades ago and never looked back. In a city where everything seems to move, according to systems too large to love you personally, Sakura begins to feel almost offensively specific. Home starts happening in pieces, not all at once, not with a declaration. It happens when your umbrella is already drying by the back door before you realize you left it there yesterday. It happens when Masao saves the sports page for you because he knows you only read the baseball scores to practice numbers. It happens when Yui sees you shivering one afternoon and asks whether your apartment has real insulation or just spiritual intentions. It happens when Fumiko notices you are quieter than usual and puts an extra piece of salmon on your tray without asking for an explanation. You think this is just kindness, and it is kindness, but it is also something more specific than kindness. You just do not have the shape of it yet. Behind the counter, there is a framed photograph you have seen 100 times and never properly registered. A young man in a school blazer standing beside a bicycle, one hand half lifted as if he has just been called by someone behind the camera. He is smiling in the casual way people smile when they assume there will be many more photos. You once ask if it is a relative. Fumiko says yes and turns back to the stove. That is the entire answer. There is also a plant by the back alley door in a chipped blue pot. Fumiko waters it every morning and sometimes stands beside it longer than watering strictly requires. You think she just likes plants? Old people in stable neighborhoods often do. That is your analysis. It is elegant in its simplicity, and wrong in the way many simple explanations are wrong. But wrongness can be comfortable when it asks nothing more of you than continued appetite. Months pass. You are no longer just the foreign student from room 407. You are the one whose tea gets poured before he sits down. The one whose scarf hangs on the peg by the kitchen when the shop is warm. The one Yui asks to help carry crates in from the POV delivery truck. The one Masao tells to stop apologizing every 6 minutes because this is a restaurant, not a hostage negotiation. You gain almost 4 kilos. Fumiko notices immediately and nods once with the satisfaction of a woman whose thesis has been experimentally confirmed. You were too thin. She fixed it. Science. Your exchange friends call you lucky. Best local spot in the city. Free side dishes. Built-in Japanese practice. A Tokyo mother. You laugh and let them say it because explaining why the phrase lands so heavily would require access to interior rooms. You are not ready to open in front of people who still think loneliness is cured by nightlife. The truth is, the apartment still feels small, the city still feels enormous, and your Japanese is still not good enough to explain the most important things. But Sakura has become a place where none of those deficits disqualify you from being looked after. Then, the small details begin. Not alarming details, not enough to worry you. Just small shifts in texture. One evening, Fumiko asks if your room still gets cold near the window on the left side. You freeze because you have never described the apartment layout to her in that much detail. You assume you mentioned it once. Another time, she asks if you are still taking the late train on Thursdays because club practice runs long. You do not have club practice. You tell yourself she is mixing you up with another student. It makes sense. Sakura has fed half the neighborhood for 30 years. Memory can stack people. One rainy afternoon, she tells you a story about a university boy who used to study at the counter and always forgot his umbrella, and once walked home in a typhoon because he insisted the rain was not serious. She tells the story with the annoyance of fresh news, then pauses and looks at you as if waiting for the version where you remember it too. You smile. You say that sounds dangerous. She nods slowly, still looking at you. Then she turns back to the stove and the room resumes. Small crack. Hairline. Easy to step over if you do not press your thumb there too long. In the final week before winter break, Yui cooks extra every night. Masao closes early twice, which feels like a civic irregularity. Fumiko makes you a bento for the plane, even though you tell her airport food exists. She ties the cloth tighter than usual. She adds written instructions for what order to eat things in, because apparently, adulthood remains a negotiable category where you are concerned. On your last Saturday, you do laundry across the street and sit at the counter longer than necessary because leaving a routine is harder when it has become part of your internal architecture. The regulars come in one by one and each of them says some version of take care. The taxi driver tells you to come back when you have real Japanese. The flower shop woman gives you a tiny packet of seeds because she says students need proof that things can restart. Masao says almost nothing, but hands you a discount you did not ask for and will not win against. Fumiko keeps moving around the kitchen with that tight, efficient quiet people use when they are trying to remain useful instead of emotional. This is how some people survive departures, by continuing to cut cabbage. Last morning, you stop by before heading to the airport because not going would feel like tearing a page out of something that has not finished being written. The shutters are half up. The light is blue and early. Fumiko is already there. Of course. She is already there. She straightens your scarf. She presses the bento into your hands. She tells you to eat before the plane and after the plane and also if the plane is late because airports make people stupid. Then she looks at you. Really looks. The kind of look that holds a person in place a second longer than time strictly allows. You want to say something bigger than thank you. something that covers food and winter and loneliness, and the fact that your apartment in Tokyo would have felt like a storage box with plumbing if Sakura had not existed 3 minutes from the station. Instead, you bow because language fails first and the body takes over. She bows too. You turn at the door. She is still standing there. You wave. She waves once. The scarf is warm around your neck. The bento is warm in your hands. You leave. At the corner, you glance back out of instinct or superstition. She is still there in the doorway under the norin, small and still in the morning cold. Something in. Your body resists the next step. Not enough to stop you. Just enough to register. Are you sure? Are you sure? Then a bicycle passes, the light changes, the city resumes making decisions on your behalf, and you keep walking because that is what departure is. Repetition breaking while everything else pretends it is a normal day. You go home. Home meaning your actual country, the place with your family and your native language, and supermarkets that no longer require emotional preparation. People ask about Tokyo. They ask about shrines and trains and vending machines and whether you saw Mount Fuji. They ask if the apartments are really that small. They ask whether people are polite. Nobody asks about Sakura. Nobody asks about the woman who taught you how to rinse rice and told you busy was not a food group and made you a lunch for an exam as if your grades had become her administrative problem. You mention her a few times anyway. People smile the polite smile reserved for travel details. They cannot properly weigh. Yes, that sounds lovely. Then the conversation moves on to airports or exchange rates or whether convenience stores in Japan are really better. They are. But that is not the point. The scarf goes into your closet. The bento cloth goes into a drawer. Your notes from that semester stay in a box for months, because opening them feels like reopening the room with the counter seat and the baseball game and the sliced oranges placed beside your pen. 4 months pass. Then an email arrives from Yui. The subject line is Sakura. For 1 full second, you think maybe she is sending a photo or asking if you are visiting in summer. Instead, the first line tells you Fumiko passed away in February after a brief illness. Peacefully. At home. You read the sentence twice because the mind has a short refusal period before it begins cooperating with loss. Yui writes that her mother talked about you often and that the family thought you should know because, in her words, you were important to her in a way that would be difficult to explain quickly. Then Yui explains anyway. Their son, Haruki, died 18 years earlier. He was 20, a university student in Tokyo living alone in a 1-room apartment in Nerima. He got sick during exam season, told his parents it was only a cold, said he was too busy to come home, and stopped answering his phone because he did not want to worry anyone while he studied. By the time the landlord opened the room, 2 days later, it was pneumonia, and then it was too late, and then time divided itself into before and after for the rest of the family. Yui writes this with the flat clarity people use when a tragedy has been narrated so many times inside a family that the shape of it has worn smooth. After Haruki died, Fumiko kept the shop open later. She started feeding students who lingered. She began wrapping leftovers in proper containers instead of disposable ones. She bought fruit more often. She learned which neighborhoods had the worst insulation. She watched boys in cheap coats and girls with dark circles and office workers who looked one missed meal away from becoming anecdotes. She did not do this because she mistook them for Haruki. She did it because she knew exactly what they were. She knew what a young person alone in Tokyo looks like when they say they are fine and mean only functioning. She knew the apartment smell of damp laundry and instant noodles. She knew how easily a city full of people can fail to notice someone shrinking inside it. Yui says your first week at Sakura, Fumiko came home and said that foreign boy has the same eyes as someone who thinks convenience store bread counts as dinner. She did not mean the eyes looked like Haruki's. She meant the tiredness did, the bluffing did, the fragile independence that young men mistake for strength did. The scarf, Yui writes, was one Fumiko had started knitting for Haruki during his second winter in Tokyo. She never gave it to him because he said he was too old for hand-knitted things, and then he got busy, and then he died, and the scarf stayed unfinished in a basket for years. Every so often she picked it up again, then put it down, then picked it up again. Tight stitches, loose stitches, starting, stopping, not knowing whether she was making something for a son who would never wear it or for the part of herself that still needed to keep her hands moving. The humming in the kitchen was a tune she used to hum while Haruki studied at the table in high school, not because he liked it. He claimed it was distracting, but because she said silence made him look too serious, and she did not trust boys who were too quiet over textbooks. After he died, the family could not hear the tune without folding inward. That was why Masao got quiet when she hummed. That was why Yui's face changed when she saw your leftovers being wrapped. It was not just nostalgia. It was a room in the past opening and everyone in the family deciding, silently, not to close it if it brought warmth with it. The bowl on Saturdays was always placed first for you because Haruki ate first before heading to club practice. Fumiko had done it for years. She never said this aloud because people do not always announce the choreography of their grief. They just keep performing it until their bodies forget it is choreography. The questions about your heater, your breakfast, your layers, your late train, your cold apartment window, all of it came from expertise purchased at an unbearable price. She was not being generically maternal. She was trying, in the only direction time still allowed, to take care of a student living alone in Tokyo. Yui says that in the last month of her life, when Fumiko got tired more easily, she still asked whether the foreign student had eaten properly after going home. Not every day, just enough that the family understood you had become part of the small internal map by which she measured the world. The morning before she went to the hospital, she apparently said make sure he wears the scarf when it is windy. Yui writes this almost apologetically, as if she is handing you something too intimate to keep but too true to hide. You read that sentence 3 times. Then you close the laptop and sit very still. The kind of stillness that has edges. After a while you go to the closet and take the scarf down from the shelf. Cream-colored, slightly uneven. You hold it in both hands and look at the rows. Some parts tight and sure, some looser, some sections where the rhythm changes as if the hands making it were remembering one thing on one day and something heavier the next. You understand it now in a new way, not as a gift that began with you, as something older that reached you because history, in rare moments, accidentally places need in the same room as leftover love. And then the question arrives, not whether she loved you. She did, in the ways available to her. The food was real. The concern was real. The scarf is still in your hands. The question is what to call a care that begins as grief and ends as shelter. Is it less real because it was partly built for someone else? Is it less yours because its first shape belonged to a boy who died 18 years before you ever missed a stop in Itabashi? Does love lose value when it is rerouted, or is rerouting one of the purest things love knows how to do?